ToolCASE, the retail banking industry's preferred choice for real-time risk management and fraud detection.
Hey, this is your host, Sam Piccolotti of the ToolCASE FraudCAST. I wanted to extend a bit of gratitude to the listeners and those that have tuned in and have been enjoying the FraudCAST episodes. And if you'd like to learn more about ToolCASE and our solutions, please feel free to visit us at www.toolcase.com. I'd like to introduce my guests today, and really, I'm going to better and more appropriately refer to them as co-hosts in this episode. Ann Davidson, VP of Risk Consulting at Allied Solutions. You guys have heard Ann speak before, and she's a resounding voice in the fraud world and a long-term expert. Ann, pleasure. Glad to have you back.
Thank you so much, Sam. Great to be here.
And the other guy that's joining us, you might have heard of, Brett Johnson, former bad guy turned good guy and good friend of mine in the FraudCAST episodes as well. Brett Johnson, Chief Criminal Officer at Arcos Labs, speaker, author, consultant. What am I missing, Brett?
I don't know. There's a whole list of things, right?
Yep, and quite a personality, but cybersecurity expert, criminal, former cyber criminal turned good guy, and all around good guy. Glad to have you back, man.
Yeah,
You have been busy.
I'm happy and thankful to be here. I'm glad we've got Ann on the show as well. It's going to be one, excuse my language, it's going to be one hell of a show.
You bet.
I'll tell you, there's a lot going on in fraud. Lots going on. We thought we were seeing some upticks in the beginning of COVID, but boy, it's all just starting to come to the surface now. So we're going to talk about those. I want to dive into a couple of statistics just to help set the stage and give the listeners a little bit of background on how bad things are from a fraud perspective.
Give us those gloom and doom numbers.
Yeah, let's start off with some gloom and doom, because man, it's just something you got to pay attention. I was reading some FBI reports this morning, and bad guys aren't giving up. They're just not giving up. They're going at it pretty hard and fast. One of the things that that I see here, that consumers reported losing 3.3 billion in 2020, and that's bad. But what's really bad is that's 1.5 billion up, right, from the prior year. I mean, who sees increases like that, right? Card not present fraud, and we were just kind of chatting about that before we started recording. Way up. Card fraud up 33% in 2020. One of the things that I think continues to frighten me about the future of our digital world and our digital progression is that data breaches were up 11% from 2,645 in 2020. And I heard another fraud expert say something in one of her episodes a couple weeks ago that I was listening to, and it said, and Brett, I know you know this, before you can monetize data, you must compromise data, right?
Yeah.
And if you get a number, up from 2,645 data breaches in 1 year, that's a problem. Knowing that most of the data breaches that happen, or a lot of them, excuse me, they go unreported.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a fact. They absolutely go unreported. And let's go a little bit further than that. All right. Let's talk about why that threat landscape is there, because a lot of companies, I've got a couple of theories. The first theory is kind of this off the wall theory. Every story that we read about a data breach, there tends to be this intern involved. The intern used the same password across websites. We heard that with Colonial Pipeline. We've heard it through a lot of these stories. I have a conspiracy theory that it's the exact same intern at every one of these companies.
Maybe it's a virtual bot intern that's being placed, right?
Russian plant that's out there that just bounces from company to company and gets intern work. You got a 70.
Brett, it's like you're saying, look at the breach from Cash App. That was a week ago, and they said former employee. Think of everybody that has put their account number or card number out there on Cash App, they're exposed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
and we know.
You're right.
We
Go
know.
back to 2020. You had Facebook, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Target. You know anybody that uses those platforms?
Right.
But that's a BS theory. That's me just going off the cuff there. But the truth of the matter is that 90% of every single attack uses a known exploit. So you have to involve, when you're talking cybercrime or online fraud, you have to talk cybersecurity as well. You have to. This idea that fraud or cybercrime is different than overall security, it's not. It's this overall picture, this overall approach, because attackers know. Do you have outward facing SMBs? Probably. Are 80% of everyone on the planet, do they use the exact same passwords across multiple websites? Yes, they do. 41% of every single router has the default password. 56% of companies have experienced a breach because of third parties. I mean, you've got all of these statistics that are out there that people have known about. We've been preaching this stuff for years about what needs to be done. Ann mentioned it right before the show started to record. Hey, you need real-time data. If you don't have, what is wrong with you?
Right.
These stats that you're talking about now, these gloom and doom stuff, the reason that these numbers are banging away like that is because every single fraudster on the planet pivoted toward stimulus fraud during the pandemic. Well, now those stimulus programs are over. And so
Joanne or Joanne Colette.
There's the virtual assistant bot.
That's it. That's the intern right there.
Joanne or Joe.
Are you all right?
Yes, it's going off. I don't know. She should know that I'm on.
Sorry, but the thing is once the stimulus program ends, and I've talked about this before with Ann, with both you and Sam, is Shadow Crew ends with 4,000 people. 2017, Alpha Bay ends with 240,000 people. 2019, Black Market ends with 1.15 million people. All that's pre-pandemic. The government institutes stimulus programs with absolutely no security in place. Most of those fraudsters will never be caught. As a result, all of these fraud numbers, the individuals, blow up. You've got all of these people that are entering into cybercrime communities. Since stimulus fraud has ended, this is not just a job. This is a career. They're not going to go down and flip burgers. They're going to pivot towards something else. You've got first-party fraud. You've got credit card fraud. You've got return fraud, all this stuff that's happening now.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, they're even looking at the layer beyond authentication. What value are you bringing out? What dollar amount can I get out of the door from your financial institution or out of your member's account?
Right.
We just had today, we had a jackpotting at an ATM, over $300,000. All they had to do was rip the top off that ATM and clean it out. It's like, wow.
So you're talking about the cost of fraud. I saw another, alarming statistic that for every dollar of fraud, it costs the financial institution $3.64.
Right.
This is my question for financial institutions. Where else in your organization would you tolerate a 364% loss? Or let me flip the question. Where can you get a 364% return on your investment?
Right.
Nowhere. So why aren't we paying attention to that number? That's an extraordinary amount of loss. Every
Right.
dollar of fraud costs them $3.64. And I don't want to, degrade and speak down to our financial institution clients, but boy, it's time. It's time to pay attention, because
Right.
at those kinds of costs, you cannot sell your way out of this. You can't produce enough product. You can't drive enough revenue to offset those type of losses. They're diving into your bottom line. They're diving into your margins, and there are things you can do better. Just like Brett, you said it. If you're not using real-time data analytics, you're not watching things in real time, you don't have a fraud strategy. You might have good reporting, but you don't have a fraud strategy, right?
Right.
You absolutely don't.
You know what we hear time and time again is customer service versus risk. Well, we can't inconvenience our customers, but they're willing to, like you said, Sam, take that high dollar exposure, the percent out there.
Yeah, I take that a little further, because I've been on the fraud side of it as a consumer, and I'm sure you guys have as well, right? And it's recurring, it's constant, for us, personally, in the sense that the fraud analyst in our family is my wife, because she's the one watching the accounts, right? And we're finding the fraud before a financial institution is finding the fraud. So you want to talk about inconveniencing a consumer, she or I or somebody's got to take time and call our banking institution and alert them to the fact that we're seeing something that looks unauthorized or suspicious on our account. And then they go back and do an investigation. And then it's usually, well, we're going to send you a new plastic card and replace that debit card with a new one. And now we've got to go online and set up all the bill pay stuff all over again and go through that. And this happens on a fairly routine basis. Or it might just be the inconvenience of, relying on antiquated technology, and, they miss the fact that $800 worth of charges for new Apple devices were shipped off to some address in Florida from my account. But when I walk into the Starbucks that I visit on a routine basis, my card doesn't work for some reason. You're laughing.
That's that on my account.
Right? So, I mean, we are inconveniencing our clients and consumers, and I think there's certainly a place for educating consumers and giving them information on watching for phishing schemes and many other educational approaches. But the buck stops at the financial institution. You're their trusted financial institution. You really should be doing all you can to mitigate those experiences and frustrations for a consumer, and pay attention to what your fraud folks are doing and what challenges they're up against on a regular basis. And I have to admit, from a from a banking perspective, I was probably just as guilty in my former corporate and commercial banking days, not paying attention to what the fraud and the loss side of the house was telling me when we were taking losses, and turn around and try to drive production and see what we can do from a sales side to try to offset that. So you'd come in with you'd have 15% increase in maybe card fraud, and you turn around and you ask your card processor, well, how am I performing? And they said, well, you're doing just as good as your peers. And that seemed like a good answer. And then I'd turn around and I'd have to try to find out how to raise my production to help try to offset those losses. It's just, it's just not the cycle you want to be on. And frankly, Ann, given what regulatory changes are forthcoming with faster payments, it's not going to work. You're going to have to take. So do you want to talk about that new NACHA rule that's just been modified?
Yeah, with NACHA, they're requiring, anybody out there that does ACH, they have a standard entry class code that identifies web, which is internet transactions, or they call them items in the ACH world. So they're saying that you have to, in 2021, you have to have a commercially reasonable security measures in place, just like you do for wires. You have to have a fraud monitoring system in place to manage those web standard entry class codes, because that is a huge, huge fraud category. So
Now, let me
anybody
ask,
else?
you
Yes.
said 2021. As of,
So it's passed. It's passed.
it's passed, it's out there.
It's
Or they
out
get-
there.
Don't have the stuff in, or supposedly is it already in place?
It's already in place. It was supposed to go into effect back in 2020, and they gave an extension on it. So it went to 2021. I want to say, I think it's April of 2021. But, you know, people don't really know about it. I mean, ACH is your account number. So if you go out to Notch's website there, Sam, they'll give you the date. I want to say, I thought it was April. But it's in place right now. You know, the commercially reasonable standards for web transactions. And to take that a step further, I'm seeing that cross over to the card not present fraud, which everybody has to have a fraud monitoring system. It's not mandated, but you should. Like Sam and Brett, you probably know you can't have a card program if you don't have a fraud monitoring system in place to alert you to suspicious transactions. But what's happening in the card not present environment, it's all online. It's online fraud. And
I've got it right here, right? You're
yeah,
right.
do you want to read it from there?
Yeah. The new rule, to some extent, a follow-up from the rule that went into effect March of 2021. So it was March of 21. And let's just,
Gets down to the web.
mhm.
Now, and while he's looking it up, is this, now we're
ahead.
talking about peer-to-peer payment systems too, like Zelle or Venmo, Cash App, things like that, or
Oh,
not?
huge. We're seeing a lot of, and I call that payment app fraud. It's Zelle, which is owned by Early Warnings. Then you have Venmo, which is owned by PayPal. You have Cash App, who just had the breach, and that's owned by Square. Then you have Apple Cash, which is owned by Apple Pay. All of those types of transaction activity, they can either go down the ACH rails, so it could be the account number, or you can download those apps and you can enter either your account number or your card number. So if you enter your card number, that's a card not present fraud. And what's happening is the bad actors out there, and Brett, maybe you can share your experience. They're out there and they know the weakest link, and they're pretending they're the financial institution for you to give out your information, and bingo, they're out there performing that type of activity. So
let
they're
me
either
ask you,
being scammed or it's unauthorized.
so the fraud prevention program that they're supposed to have in place, either on CNP or on this peer-to-peer stuff, does it also cover social engineering fraud, or is it just the technical ATO type attacks that the fraud prevention program, or does it matter?
Well, what Notcha's saying, it's Notcha transmits routing and account number. So it would be routing and account number. So any digital environment where it goes through and it's labeled as a WEB, that's where that rule goes into place. So that would be anything over an open network, electronic, you know, an ACH, you know, going out the door.
I asked that, and I will get back on track here.
Yeah, yeah.
That is, take Zelle, for example.
Yeah.
Zelle says that as long as the account holder makes the movement, chooses to move that money, that it's not fraud, even if that account holder is socially engineered, conned into moving the money. So this, and the way this, you mentioned a second ago, the way the fraud typically works is the potential victim will get a text message that looks like it comes from the financial institution. It'll have the bank, you know, logo on the text message or what have you, and it'll say, hey, this we're about to approve the wire transfer, the money transfer for X amount of dollars. If you didn't authorize this transfer, press N or whatever, you do that, and then you immediately get a phone call from what looks like your financial institution. They say, you know, it's fraud that's on your account. We're going to make sure we fix it up for you. And they con you into sending all your money out to them.
And the consumer takes the loss there. The consumer, I mean, they got social engineered, they got scammed, and that is huge. If you go out on any TV station, any news media, and put in the word Zelle fraud, you'll see how I just got ripped off. They just took $3,500 from me. But then you have the other one where they get your personal or financial information and they go out and perform the activity. Then that becomes unauthorized. And with Zelle, there's no authentication. The money flies out the door and they're saying friends and family only. Well, is the consumer just going to do it with friends and family? No.
No, not at all.
No.
So there's no, so with notches, that does not cover that? Or the bank is doing that work around that?
Well, not just saying because it's going, if it's initiated as a web, W-E-B, if that's the class code that's put in the system, then that requirement, it's required.
Okay.
And anything that goes through an open network would be listed as web. So that would apply if they hacked into online banking.
Right.
And pulled the money in from another financial institution, which would be an ACH debit. They're debiting Sam's account from XYZ bank out there, or it would be an ACH credit where money is going in to the receiving depository financial institution. I think they use the word debit in there, but it applies to both.
Ann, are you familiar with the rule around the micro entry?
Oh, right. That works with PayPal. So when you do a PayPal transaction, you get a micro or a test or transaction to authenticate prior to the funds going out. That's the authentication for that. Now with Zelle, there's nothing like that. When the money goes out, it just flies out the door to another.
Yeah, I'm reading the update on the rule for micro entries. Says, this rule will define micro entries as ACH credits of less than $1 of any offsetting ACH debits used for the purpose of verifying a receiver's account. And it goes on to state here that the term microentry will be defined and originators will be required to use the standard company entry description and follow their origination practices. Originators of microentries will be required to use commercially reasonable fraud detection, including the monitoring of microentry forward and return volumes.
Yep. So that's in format, real time, core data processing level. I mean, it's key.
Right. And here's my question, and you guys can probably answer this much better than I can. Maybe not. I've been talking to a few people.
Probably not. Probably not, Brett.
We've got these major institutions that use something like Zelle. All right. Now, the Zelle app, its security is provided by EWS, which means that they see the entire picture of both the receiver and the sender of that transfer. But if you're doing it through your financial institution, you've got the sending and you've got the receiving. They don't see each other's accounts. And typically on these institutions, you're dealing with different security companies as well. So it seems to me that one of the reasons that this fraud is so prolific, again, it's that idea of the fraudster looking at the weakest link. The fraudster realizes that, hey, I can set up these receiving accounts, the sending account. Yeah, it's on the Zelle network, but they don't get to see how I set up the account, the way I set it up, how the volume that's been on the account, the history of the account, or anything else like that. So I get to trick the potential victim into sending it out. They do. The sending bank doesn't realize that how the account was set up on the receiving bank, and that becomes the issue. So if you've got a company like it that's using Informant or something like that, if both services are using that, it seems to me that you could stop a lot of fraud, potentially 98% of it.
Yeah, that's one angle. The other,
but then it's go ahead. Sam,
no, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say the financial institutions, when they get that agreement from those payment app companies, don't worry, you're not the originating depository financial institution. You're not the ODFI. We have an ODFI that works with those originators, But guess what? In the vendor agreement, guess who's ultimately liable?
Of course. Of
Of
course.
course. So it's a misunderstanding out there, because a lot of financial institutions will say, don't worry, we're not an ODFI because we don't want to warrant the risk, because the ODFI warrants the risk. The receiving, like through all that unemployment insurance fraud, the receiver, they took the money in, they're not out. It always goes back to, that's why the states were asking for the return of that unemployment. They were the originator, and then their financial institution was the originating depository financial institution. With Zelle,
Yeah.
Zelle has their own. So it's
Right.
in the agreement.
Because
Saying-
I've actually spoken to some of these financial institutions. I won't say who they were, but
Mhm.
I've spoken to some of these people about stimulus fraud, and basically the answer was, and it was kind of a crap answer, hey, it wasn't our money. We were just the receiver.
Yep.
Which
They
is
don't take the loss. They don't take the loss. They don't warrant the risk. It's the originating depository financial institution. The receiving depository financial institution, they were getting requests all over the country to return that money. And we were telling them, don't return it. It's not the money's gone. It's out the door. Too bad, so sad, because the originator is supposed to authenticate you. So that's why, Sam, with your solution, I mean, that's at the front end, that notch rule. When that web initiates, when it goes out the door, they need to have your solution in place in real time.
Well, yeah, and the challenge is you have little to no time, right, to be able to do some kind of reconciliation or analytics on this. So, you're trying to analyze the historical behavior of that sender to see whether or not they have a history of sending, what in respect to this transaction looks maybe autonomous from other related activity that individual's used, and whether or not there's another data point or data set that you might be able to hit to identify whether or not there's any other, suspicious or correlating information, the data that might render that to be suspicious. And then I believe, and Ann, I'm not sure, but I think that there's a certain level of tolerance through that clearing that allows for some holds, right? If they don't meet if certain flags are presented, right, then that transaction can be paused or held.
That's on the receiving end. If you're a receiving depository, you have, for consumer, if it comes through as a consumer to consumer ACH, you have 60 days to return it back to the ODFI, the originator. For a business to business, you only have 24 hours. So we just had a financial institution the other day. They had 91 ACH payments in 24 hours on a credit card. So instead of a $5,000 line of credit loss on the credit card, it ended up being about $80,000, because
Yes.
the receiver has now returned those 91 ACH payments back to the originating depository financial institution. So they're smart out there, Brett. They're very creative today.
So, and here's something that Sam mentioned as well. He was talking about on his account that he saw fraud before the financial institution.
Yeah. Wow.
And the thing is I've seen kind of this almost motif going through LinkedIn among some of these fraud analysts that talk. And some of them they've either been alluding to peer-to-peer payments or gift cards or different types of fraud like that, but they've made the comments kind of off the cuff that the consumer has, that's one of the lines of defense. I'm of the opinion that if you're relying on a consumer to be your line of defense, that you're doing something way wrong. That's my opinion, because you're not going to educate the consumer. You're not. You can try it. You may raise some of the awareness of that consumer, But if you rely on that consumer to be a line of defense to find this fraud before your financial institution does, when your financial institution should be looking at every single bit of the data and be able to see that stuff even before it happens, there's a problem.
Well, look at the environment around, debit card activity, for instance. Generally, you're relying on your card processor to identify fraud, through that authorization, a pre-authorization process, right? And if you're in the business of monitoring transactions as a card processor is, and you've got millions of transactions happening in rapid format, these type of transactions that, like these micro entries that we were talking about on the ACH side, same kind of thing with test charges on the plastic side. Those are generally not detected or monitored from a card processor standpoint, and they're not going to take action on every authorization. Now, the standing and historical argument for that was, well, that's how gas station authorizations come through. So we can't monitor every pre-authorization that's sent through for $1. Well, but that, as you well know, that's a testing process for that account, right? So inherently, they're not in the business to monitor test transactions, which from a criminal activity standpoint are a strong indication that there's a compromise to that account and more fraudulent activity pending, right? Because that account now becomes more profitable in the marketplace, in the dark web, if you will, because it's been tested and authorized. Now it's an active account. So the position of, you can't put that back on a consumer. They don't have the ability to monitor for those test transactions on their own. Sometimes you see them. I've seen some erroneous charges that come through with, and Ann, you're quite familiar with these too, the gibberish type accounts,
Right.
keep pounding type, merchant charges that are coming through that, might be for $3.50 or something of that nature. Well, when you're paying your card processor to monitor for fraud, and then you're paying them to manage the fraud, they're really getting paid when there's a fraud occurrence. They're not getting paid to do anything about the test transactions. I mean, that's a service and a function. But it leads, and it inevitably is leading to more fraudulent charges. So, I agree with you 100%. To put that back and say it's a consumer obligation, they don't have the data, they don't have the insights, and they don't have the wherewithal to test for those kind of things. We can test for those kind of things. We can see those kind of things that are happening. We're reading that pre-authorization stream of data. We can see that a test authorization has just come through, and then take action on either hot carding or doing something, or special monitoring, whatever it is, escalating the monitoring capability on that card. But to just ignore those test transactions and wait for the fraud to happen, and then allow for neural net technology in a card processing environment to get 3 transactions down the line and then stop it, and then point to the consumer and say the consumer should be more aware. That's just ridiculous, right? It doesn't work like that. We have not set up a successful fraud implementation process by completely relying on a third-party card processor to monitor for things that only become evident from a behavioral standpoint, and ignore the pre-authorization type attempts that card fraudsters are making in verifying those accounts from the beginning, right? Let's assume that every single piece of plastic in your wallet is compromised. Start with that approach. Your data is out there and it's already been compromised.
Right.
And heighten the level of security that you're putting on those accounts.
I mean, that's the correct approach. You talk about authorizations back when, so as people know, I'm called that original Godfather, and there's a reason for that. I was on the ground floor of all this credit card fraud as we know it today. When you were getting credit cards back 20 years ago, you'd get the credit card number, or you'd get the physical credit card, and you'd encode the data on the back of a counterfeit card. What do? You go down to the gas station, you swipe. If it charges, then you go over to Best Buy and you get your laptop. You always pre-authorize. As a matter of fact, if you're buying CNP data, called CVV data within criminal environments, but if you're buying that data on the dark web or on Telegram or wherever you're buying it today, you're looking for cards that are good. So what happens with a breach? Some fraudster goes out and he breaches, he does a man in the middle attack, whatever he's doing. He gets a lot of credit card numbers, maybe maged card, whatever he's got. He's got a lot of credit card numbers. Now, when he starts to sell those credit card numbers, there's a shelf life. You only have so long to use those cards before every card is dead. So you sell them as quickly as you can, and then you're going to try to use them as quickly as you can before they die. So you need to know if the cards are valid. You need to know that, especially when you first start. Are they good? Probably, because the seller's already tested. He's already authorized a whole crap load of them to know that the batch is good. But the longer they're sitting there, you're going to have to pre-authorize those cards. You're going to know, hey, are they dead or are they alive? So how do I pre-auth them? Well, you can do it at gas stations still today. You can go online. You can do phone sex. Yeah. That used to be one of the big pre-authorizations. You'd call these 1-800, dating sites. And you'd put in the card number. It would tell you whether the card was still alive or not. Before it would charge, you'd simply hang up. You can do the same thing with streaming services. You do the same things with a lot of your music streaming services, things like that. There's tons of ways that you can pre-authorize a card. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that's something that the consumer doesn't see, doesn't pay attention to, but it is a fraud flag. Absolutely it is. And when you're telling me that, these processing companies aren't paying attention to that, oh my.
Well, I'll share another incident that I've got a friend that someone I know personally just had this. I won't name the financial institution, but I'll paint the picture of the breakdown of the holistic lack of holistic and operational perspective that the financial institution did not have. So and I just read about this ring that just got busted. It was on the FBI's site today down in Florida. The stereotypical fitness center or gym smash and grab, kind of a fraud, right? So somebody's scoping out the parking lot. The victim, she's going into the gym, tucks her purse underneath the floor mat of the car, walks into the gym. Moments later, somebody comes over to the vehicle, breaks the window, takes the purse. She's in there working out, doesn't know that this just happened. Somebody identifies that the window was broken, comes in, tells somebody at the front desk. They put a thing over the loudspeaker. She comes down. The police are waiting outside. She quickly calls her bank. Now, who did she call? She calls the bank and alerts them that her checking account, and her debit card, her plastic card in her wallet has been stolen. So they alert the card processor and they put a hold on that account. So that card is frozen. Before that happened, in that short period of time, the perpetrators went over to Walmart and they walked up to Walmart and they bought something for a minimum amount of money, and immediately it was approved. And they consequently then grabbed a bunch of gift cards off the shelf and they ran a few gift cards through and they walked out with several $100s in gift cards. Now, because they have her identification, her bank card, et cetera, they find out now she now contacts her financial institution, tells them that her debit card has been stolen. So they put a freeze on that account, on the debit card account. And meanwhile, the fraudsters find somebody, female-like, I guess looks somewhat similar to the picture on the driver's license. That individual is coerced into walking into a financial institution, the same financial institution, mind you, just hours later, goes into the business account of that individual now
Mhm.
and withdraws $11,000.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So this sounds a lot like it's like the name of it's like the Florida Lane Fraud Gang or something like that.
That's the one that I just read about, but I think this is a different ring
Right.
because I didn't see Colorado listed in there. But the financial institution took the step of notifying the card processor, right? There's a freeze on the account. We're going to issue you a new debit card. Don't worry about your checking account, that's protected. Failed to organizationally, holistically, and make additional notes on the account, letting the rest of the organization know, because there's a correlating business account tied to the account holder, that identity had been stolen and that other transactions should be scrutinized before somebody comes in and asks for a $11,000 withdrawal out of their business account, right? So
Yep. Yeah.
this is just sloppy financial institution behavior. Shouldn't happen. You've got people calling the back of their debit cards to report fraud, thinking that they're talking to the financial institution. They're not talking to the financial institution, right? And waiting for the financial institution to take more control and ownership over that account and that account relationship, and and communicating. Now, I don't want to preach on on ToolCASE's functionality capability, but the difference is,
By all means, preach.
Yeah.
you know,
Preach. I'm
we're
preaching.
getting all the data, right? We integrate with the core banking system. We integrate with the reauthorization stream, the pre-authorization stream. We grab that credit card information. We give the financial institution a holistic picture of what's happening with that individual. We can see all the data elements of that, right, in real time. So whether it's a test transaction that comes in or some other type of suspicious activity, it's noted. And then we can integrate and write back into the core so that information is placed on that account automatically, if you wish, that notifies the rest of the individuals and the employees in the financial institution that that particular account has some kind of flag on it for related fraud. So before they hand out $11,000 to whatever interpreter of that driver's license that's sitting in front of them, they have some kind of awareness. The Lang gang or whatever you were talking about, same scenario, Brett, right? Same exact scenario. They're grabbing
That's
the
why
ID.
I have a password on my account. I have a password because my account was changed 15, 20 years ago. So no matter what I do, they have to ask me that password or passcode.
Ah,
And so I've had, like I said, it was about a year ago, the lady at the drive up, I said, don't you want to ask me something? She goes, oh yeah, you have a password on your account. Don't you want to ask me something? And so then I reported it to the VP of risk saying, she forgot to ask me my passcode, my password. So they wanted to give me like a $50 gift. I said, no, take that gift certificate, have coffee and donuts, and do an education training with the internal staff.
wow.
So,
Yeah.
So, today, fast forward to today, if every consumer out there should have some type of authentication on their account, a password, passcode, voice technology, biometrics to, as an additional layer to get in there. But like you said, Sam, your tool is real time as it's happening. It's so critical. A lot of financials need to connect that real time piece.
It's certainly a missing component. And I think you illustrated great consumer, awareness piece. but I'd say the onus is on the financial institution to
Yep.
adopt that practice and protocol and educate their consumers.
Yep.
Not expect the consumer to come in and ask their financial institution, can you set up a password for me? That should be done at account opening.
Right. Yeah. Most of them say we only do it if you've been hit with fraud. It's like, really? and
Well,
your
you're gonna
scenario,
get with fraud.
yeah, I love your scenario because probably 15, 20 years ago, my mother was at the grocery store, and you know how a lot of women put their purses in the grocery carts? Well, when she was getting something off the shelf, they lifted her card, and they were the same way, so fast, going to the financial, trying to get a cash advance immediately. But so all those grocery stores should have notes when you come into the store. Do not put your purse in the cart. It's at risk.
Here's this goes into really why I'm pissed off so much. If you look at multi-factor authentication, an institution that offers NFA, they're lucky to get an adoption rate of 12 to 14%. That's a high number to them. All right. So you can't rely on the consumer for your security. But Sam points out something that's really interesting. So this woman gets her purse stolen. Debit card or credit card fraud is committed immediately. If you have that holistic approach, if you're looking at the entire system of what's going on with that customer in real time, you see that that customer is already a victim of fraud. So then all of a sudden you've got somebody attempting a withdrawal of $11,000. That should be fraud flags through the roof, through the app. But because you're not looking at that fraud continues. Meanwhile, you've got these gangs, whatever the name of the gang is, you've got these gangs that understand that, hey, we steal the purse, we immediately use the credit card or the debit card, let's bang that out before they're able to report it. Guess what? We've got an ID here too, we've got a checkbook, let's go and see if we can get some money out of the account. Well, it turns out you can, because financial institutions aren't looking at that in real time and holistically. So there's a reason that I'm pissed off.
It may even be, more problematic. The financial institution may, because that fraud was committed on plastics, may be handing that off to card services and not even have a dedicated fraud area. I don't know that, but I've seen this in time and time again in financial institution models that, well, who manages in your financial organization your fraud? Oh, well, that's card services. And that's the extent of the fraud department, right? Or what happens in cards is not working in conjunction with what's happening in over-the-counter fraud or other types of fraud. So there's this siloed approach at organizational structure in many financial institutions where, unfortunately, it's just not a priority from a top-down standpoint. They're segmenting fraud by departments and not looking at it. When we talk about holistic, we're talking about from an account related standpoint, but it also comes into an organizational fraud management structure that you really need from the top down to understand how fraud is impacted across different silos or segments of the organization. And I still think, and I still see that actually in many organizations, just haven't adopted an organizational structure that looks at fraud from a holistic standpoint. And I'll speak directly to, the C-level executives that are out there. It begins with you guys, right? You've got to show importance from a top-down perspective. You need to be able to look at your fraud teams, the fraud mitigation side of the house, and understand that those cost centers are just as valuable and just as important as the production side of your business. Those that are driving loan volume and driving asset growth. Because as we talked about before, if you're losing $3.64 to every dollar of fraud, that affects the balance sheet, and it should be just as important as every other business priority that you're running, because like we said before, you can't sell your way out of this thing, right? We did a I spoke a few weeks ago at a ePay event down in Orlando, and the topic was less fraud, less friction. And my opening remark was, I'm happy to talk about less fraud, less friction, but let's get one thing straight. There will be no less fraud. It's just a matter of what you're going to do about the fraud that you're having. But from an industry standpoint, we're going to be challenged more and more with this, right? They are not, to your point, Brett, before, they're not going anywhere. They're not changing their vocations and going to flip burgers, right? I think is how you mentioned it.
Right.
It's way more profitable, and they've already got the learning mechanisms in place. We've seen an onslaught of this in 2020 and 2021, and I suspect primarily because banking institutions have been toying with the concept of making digital transformations and offering digital products like Zelle and other methodologies to make it more convenient for the consumers so they don't have to come into the branches. But COVID hits and they can't go into the branches, and the banks need to find another way to service their customers. So they thrust themselves forward with digital banking products without taking steps to think about what the fraud impact of those are going to be. So it was a wide open opportunity for the fraudsters, and I think we've seen evidence.
I got to tell you, that is the best explanation of that I have heard.
Great.
I think it's spot on.
I agree. Brett, you mentioned gift cards.
Sure.
Gift cards has been something, a thorn ever since the card associations rolled out gift cards. They never created a unique merchant category code like they did for internet gambling or online gambling, face-to-face gambling. They have a unique code that says, this is a gambling transaction. We can manage the risk. Gift cards, there is no code. So you can buy gift card after gift card after gift card. So then the other day I get in the mail from one of my financial institutions. It says, change it up, the new debit card roundup program. So that's going to mess up some strategies that are out there because people are putting even dollar transactions might be, quote, high risk.
Exactly.
But now with this roundup, it's going to take you to an even dollar transaction. So it's like sometimes we don't mix, the marketing people too have a great idea, but it's going to open the door for.
And explain to people why not having a code is detrimental from a monitoring standpoint.
Oh, yeah, not having a code, it's like with payment apps, if you use Zelle, Venmo, Cash App with a debit card or a credit card, it comes through as a unique merchant category code 4829 money transfer. If you go and do an internet gambling transaction or a face-to-face gambling transaction, it has a unique merchant category code 7995. So with that unique code, you can build a strategy to say, we don't want to do internet gambling. So you block MCC 7995, and because it's on the internet, there's a condition code 59. So now, if it's illegal in your state, you've blocked it. But you might want to still keep open the face-to-face. That doesn't have that condition code. It just has the MCC 7995. So that's what they should be creating for gift cards. So you can manage that risk and put strategies in place and build your authorization parameters to help prevent some of that gift card fraud. And Visa and MasterCard say, yeah, Ann, we've known about this for years and years and years. Do something about it. Nothing's
and if that code is available in that pre-authorization,
there's no code.
Right, but if it were available, like the other codes that are available in that ISO 8583, documentation or stream of data, we can see that. We could do something about it.
Very that person coming in buying 20 Walmart gift cards.
Correct.
It is still happening. It's happening all the time, right?
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And and look at the Walmart situation in particular. Very common practice for people to walk into Walmart, do a quick test transaction, and then turn around and walk out with a bunch of even dollar gift cards. And it's not Walmart's responsibility to manage that fraud because they're not losing money on that transaction. But try to commit fraud on Walmart online, where it is the risk is theirs, and they've got the processes in place to mitigate that effort.
I love that. I love that analogy. That's great.
You're right on.
You know
I
what,
agree with you.
So
and you've
certainly, you know, it's look, we all want to, you know, take care of our house and make sure we're doing our own housekeeping. But whether we're talking about, you know, debit card fraud, or we're talking about, unemployment fraud, you know, these type of things. If you've got, I'm going to give you an example when it comes to like the stimulus money and the payments, you know, the fraud that was happening there. We had financial institutions that they're not losing money, right? If these checks are being deposited, but they've got customers and or members who are committing fraud knowingly. They're in your system, right? You may not have an obligation, or you may not be taking a loss, but your responsibility from a financial, if I guess the message is, if you've got a customer and a member who's willing to participate in fraud, they may not be frauding you, and you may not be losing money, but they're still willing to commit fraud within your organization. There's a darn good chance they're going to turn around and try the same thing with you. So it's a matter of taking ownership. And again, right, we've been preaching this and making it a priority from the top down, that you're just going to take an offensive approach at managing fraud organizationally. And then recognizing the staff that are working in those departments when they raise these issues and they say, hey, we want to deploy this technology, or we want to add to an FTE. We need another resource. Financial institutions have to embrace the fact that at $3.64 per dollar, there's a business case there to pay attention to that request, right?
Agree.
Yeah.
I mean, my question, and so we three are on the same page. We know that basically the siloed approach, and I've been bitching about it for a while, the siloed approach is a failure. You need that holistic approach. You need real-time data. You need to look at the entire system across the board and then make your decision from that point. We know that. I actually think that a lot of institutions know it as well. How do you convince one of these institutions to dismiss that siloed approach that they've always used, that they're comfortable with, that even though it's failing on many points, they're still using? How do you convince a company that, hey, no, you're wrong? Because we talk about this all the time.
Well,
it's like
I think you're right. It's a very good question. It's an industry question. And I'm going to compliment what Allied Solutions is doing here, because from a bonding perspective and insuring against those losses, you know, they're taking a proactive approach because, and if I got it right, I mean, your customers, your client financial institutions are at risk of seeing higher premiums, higher deductibles, because they're taking additional losses. What they're doing in good faith is turn around and offering the advice and the education and the insights that Ann, from a consulting perspective, is educating them on better methodologies and better practices, so that when Allied Solutions is out presenting their products to the marketplace to be competitive, they can show their customers a better way to get a return, and by reducing risk and taking a different strategy. The other component to that, Brett, I think is financial institutions understanding really the true cost of fraud today. And unfortunately, the metrics for identifying or counting or calculating that cost is sometimes lost, because it's insulated into budgets that you're spending to your card processor, and you're not getting back maybe the depth of analytics and really being able to understand what that cost of doing business is. But I think it's a several pronged approach, and begins with having the strategic side of the financial institution, sales and production side, working conjunction with the with the financial side of the house that's responsible for managing not just the assets but the liabilities of the institution, and recognizing that all of this is going to have an impact on their ability to be competitive in the marketplace. If you want to have good and low insurance costs and deductibles, you're going to have to deploy strategies and methodologies that reduce your risk.
Right.
If you want to be safe from a data standpoint, not just because your auditors and your regulators are telling you that it's something you have to do, because you don't want to put yourself at reputational risk and financial risk by having these breaches, you've got to make that a priority. Banking organizations in general take direction and change and adhere to policies that are forced upon them by regulatory bodies. That's not enough, right? You've got to step a little bit further, not just do what you're forced to do, but do what you need to do or you should to do to stay competitive. So I think there are several approaches there. If I were to summarize, I would say, have the financial side of the house look at both sides of the balance sheet. Understand that your operational costs tied to fraud extend much further than what's being reported out of your fraud department. It's impacting you from what you're paying on your insurance cost in the form of deductibles or premiums. So take a look at those. If you think they're high and there are practices that you can adopt that will help offset those, let's deploy them.
Right.
I think if you look at the analogy in the world of health, right? When we look at healthcare, if you're a business and you've got high workman's comp costs, you can complain about them, but you can also take a look at what's driving the cost of your workman's comp. And if that means that you're not taking a holistic, healthy approach at managing the lifestyles and your employees are not doing that, what can you do as a business to help encourage that behavior to reduce your cost? Well, you take a holistic approach at improving the health, and maybe you replace the soda machine with water or whatever practices. I don't think it's any different. I think financial institutions need to take the same approach that businesses take when trying to look at rising healthcare costs, or government agencies are doing in form of reducing healthcare costs. It begins with a holistic, healthy approach to managing that business, but you have to want to make a difference, right?
And sometimes enough is enough. I mean, Brett, from your former background, with the, Albert Gonzalez, the king of card fraud down there in Miami, and then you have Frank Abagnale, and then yourself. I mean, you find the weakest link. You find what the financial institutions are not doing and what they're not bringing to the table. So it gets to a point where, like, to go back to what you just said, Sam, that holistic, you really need to see the big picture. You need to have tools and solutions in place to manage that risk. And I'll give one example. In Canada, with the cards, Canada was offering fallback on the chip cards. So if the chip didn't read at the point of sale, you could have it, quote, fall back to a chip mag stripe authorization. So what do you think the criminal did? They put a fake chip on that card. It would not read, and it fell back. Well, in 2017, Visa said enough is enough. They sent out a mass communication, one page, no more fallback. So they drove it because, like you were saying, Sam, they saw the exposure the chip wasn't helping because it was all going to chip mag stripe fraud because the bad guys could still skim it. Well, fast forward to today, that type of fraud is in the US. We are the only country that is allowing that mag stripe fallback to when the chip isn't read. And every day I talk to a financial institution and balancing it, they go, well, member service versus risk. So until things get mandated or removed, it's sometimes a challenge to get people to understand. So by having that holistic point of view, at least they would see it and catch it and be able to take action on what they don't have in place.
Boy,
So,
if you want to coin an initiative in an organization, I think Ann just laid it out for you. Sometimes enough is enough. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
that should be everyone's motto right there.
Yeah.
You know, it really should. I mean, you're right, Ann. You as a fraudster, there is no need to beat your head up against a wall if there's an easier path to take. Why would I worry about trying to hack into a chip if I've got a huge country of 350 million people where they will let me swipe? I don't worry about that at all. And I make a lot of money at the end of the day. So fraudsters, I say we because I used to be one. We are not idiots. We are on some aspects, but when it comes to stealing money, we are not idiots.
you find that weakest link. And that's why Sam's that holistic viewpoint with what ToolCASE brings to the table, I can't say enough about it. And being in real time is huge. And so anyone out there listening today, I would encourage you really need to look at that type of solution. And really, it's going to help manage your risk. That's huge.
Thanks, Ann. And, we appreciate the partnership. Allied's taking, a proactive approach at trying to, educate and inform and help their clients deploy best practices. It's important. We appreciate it. Absolutely. ToolCASE, we're 20 years at doing real-time data streaming. It's just what we do. I think folks in the industry are starting to see the importance of that. Regulators are talking about it. It's going to be a necessity. If you're interested in learning more about the ToolCASE solutions and our approach at real-time data analytics and how we utilize artificial intelligence to support the automation of that, give us a call. Brett Johnson, I want to thank you for taking time and sharing your expertise and your knowledge, your insight. It's always a pleasure to have you. I've said it before. I think if we have the Godfather of the dark web on one side, we've got the godmother of fraud on the other. It's a pleasure to have both of you guys. Look forward to future discussions. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you so much.
Learn more about the ToolCASE suite of real-time AI products and how to protect your institution from fraud today.